All right, good afternoon. It is February 5th, 2024. The time is 3:01 p.m. This is a special meeting workshop of the Argyle ISD Board of Trustees. At this time, we'll determine if a quorum is present.
Leona McDade present.
Leanne Oligo present.
Matt Slayton present.
Kurt Hawksworth present.
I, Sam Slayton, present. We do have a quorum established. This time, we'll have our Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
We'll have a brief moment of silence and get our workshop started. Thank you. And no one signed up for public comment, so we'll get going.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
All right, y'all ready? Go ahead and get started. Okay. So we are here for our kickoff coming to our budget process for 24-25. This is our first official budget workshop with the Board of Trustees. So I'm going to turn it over to our amazing CFO, Liz Stewart, and let her take it from here. So,
okay, thank you. So as you know, this is a little bit earlier for us in our planning process for the board workshops. We are typically in our administrative planning at this point in the year. So I thank y'all for being available to come in and go over with some information with us right now. You do have a handout in front of you, and then we've got it up on the screen as well. First, we want to say thank you to our local representatives. We have our Honorable Rhonda Mish, Richard Hayes, and Lynn Stuckey. And Hayes is here with us today, and great to come in and see us. And then the State Senator, Tian Parker. They worked with us through the special sessions and the regular session. They were listened to us, took our phone calls, came and had meetings with us, and actually went through, if we were able to say, hey, this bill helps us, could you put this amendment in or support this amendment? They were good to work with us on that front. So I do want to say that because we are in a steady process for public school finance. And, we've got a lot of work to do through the legislature to fix this. And so I want to talk about some things that got us here and what's happened and what has not happened at the state level. So kind of some things. In a normal budget workshop, we would go over each one of these items because typically you talk about all of them. The ones highlighted today are the ones that we're going to spend a little more time on because we're going to have some other meetings along the way. So how we got here. Back in 2019, we had the 86th legislative session, and there was quite a bit of change to school finance. It was House Bill 3. Very celebrated bill. It revamped our school funding formula. It was intended as an increase to all schools. However, through the process of looking at how the bill affected each individual district, they determined that not every district would see an increase in funding. So a formula transition grant was established for schools that did not realize any increase in funding. We are one of those school districts. There were about 200 at the time. That has moved down to less than 100 as of this year. There was also one other major change in that funding formula that to me was detrimental to our district and any growing district. And that is a change from prior year to current year taxable assessed values. I don't see us ever going back to that, but you should need to know, in a combination of how did we get here from 2019, that is a major issue for our district and others like us.
Were you able to expand upon why that hurt us?
Yes, so prior to this, House Bill 3, the school funding formula looked at what we call the prior year taxable assessed value in figuring your funding formula. But you collect taxes on your current year value. So there was a gap there, right, on what you collected. So the state only figured in what you should collect on the prior year. But if you're in a growing district, you've had a growth. You could have had a 3%, 10%, 15% growth in your taxable assessed value. And so a growing district was collecting those taxes, but only part of that was included in the funding formula. So in essence, that created a lag each year, and it was recognized in the funding formula, but we were able to keep.
So we got more from the state because they didn't have us at a higher value.
Right, they would only recognize the taxable assessed value a year in lag, but we got to collect taxes on the full value in that year. So that benefited any growing school district, and that was a major change in House Bill 3.
Is that what impacted us the most? That we needed the
I would
formula
say at this point, formula transition grant is gonna be the single most impactful thing to our district, but.
Is that what made us need it? Like, what was it in the
I
bill
believe
that-
part of it, yes, because we had a pretty large growth in that year,
Okay.
so. All right, we're gonna move forward to the 88th legislative session. So we had a record budget surplus at the state level, but there was no increase in the basic allotment since 2019. We've talked about this, we've had record inflation. There's a need of over $1,000 increase in the basic allotment to keep up with the inflation since 2019, which we have not had an increase. There was no relief for formula transition grant districts. So again, there's about 80 districts, or 80 some odd districts that are left in this formula transition grant that's gonna see a funding cliff starting next year. We have 4 special sessions with no action on school funding, other than property tax relief in the second special session. That does not change our funding level though. That doesn't do anything to a school finance formula. The benefit there is to the homeowner or the taxpayer, and it is a good benefit. We've talked about that. We were able to lower taxes over 18 cents in 1 year here in Argyle AISD. However, that does not change any funding for our district.
So were we held harmless in that?
We're held harmless in that, yes. So looking forward, the next legislative session without a special session will be the 89th and 25. So this means we're gonna build the 24-25 budget and more than likely the 25-26 budget without any fiscal change from the school funding model. So we have a call to action for our next legislative session, and if there is a special called session, it would be the same legislative action. We need to address inflation. To do that is to increase the basic allotment. We've talked a lot about the formula transition grant and how that affects our district. This is simply my opinion. When that rolls off at the end of this year, I don't know that they'll ever come back and put that in. So our focus may need to be on increasing that basic allotment enough to cover inflation and fully fund public schools. That goes into staff retention, our fuels, our utilities, our insurance, and increase the classroom dollars. So that's where we're gonna talk about our basic call to action moving forward. All right, this is kind of a recap on our budget process, and it's a little different again, like I said, in the past, because in the past we would not have had a budget workshop until May, typically the end of May. And we've done all our stuff administratively up to that point, but with the crisis we're in, we need to start now. So highlight is where we're at, February 5th, this budget workshop. We're gonna have our regular board meeting on the 20th. We will bring in a staff efficiency report from Moat Casey. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We're gonna have several other budget workshops. We're gonna schedule one for March, April, and May. And I know these dates may be new to you, so those are just held dates at this point. And then we're also gonna have our regular board meetings. If we need to have budget workshop beyond May, we'll schedule those as well. All right, just a reminder, we received our certified values in July, towards July 25th. And right now, our tentative date to adopt the budget and tax rate is August 19th, but that is subject to change as well as we go through this process. All right, some action steps. We talked about this at our last board meeting. Continue with our legislative advocacy plan. We'll have this budget workshop that we're in right now, additional board workshops. We are collaborating with area districts. Dr. Carpenter has talked to you about meeting with some other North Texas school districts that are feeling the same pain we are, because this is not just an Argyle ISD problem, this is a statewide problem. Some of these districts are further along in this process because they've felt this pain for a few more years than we have. Some of them are just starting, and then some of them are where we at, where it's been in development for a little while. But it's collaboration to talk about those things, the same similarities that we're all finding in this, and strategies that we can find from each other. And then we've created a financial strategy team administratively. So up until last week, we were meeting as a cabinet and discussing the budget process as a cabinet. We've now expanded that, and we will have team meetings every Wednesday throughout this process and probably through next year as well. And included in that are, again, the cabinet. It is our technology director, chief technology officer, our executive director of operations, and our special education director. And we also individually, as we talk about different areas, we go out and work with those that it would affect or need to pull in some resources.
In these workshops that we're gonna have to participate in, this financial strategy team that you're forming, these weekly meetings that you're having to have, is all because nothing has come out of the current legislative session.
That is correct. This
Okay.
is all in
This
response.
isn't what we normally do.
No, this is all in response to the deficit and the crisis that us, as along with every other district, is in at this point.
Thank you.
Which really just adds to it, because we're paying people to do a job that they're not doing, right? No offense, I
Right,
mean,
no.
you're not doing your job, but we've just added more to you, and to the CTO, and to all these different
Special
people.
education director.
And we have to pay them, we're paying them to do things that we weren't expected to pay them to do.
That's correct. Their job duty has been expanded to include this process.
Okay?
All right, there's a few slides in here, basic school finance. I'm not gonna go over in detail. Again, this would be something we would hit, quite a bit if we were looking at, this is just a basic school finance 101, but the information is there. You're, welcome to go back and look at it at any time. Just talks about a little bit about how we're funded.
So I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned a minute ago, an increase of $1,000 per student just to keep up with inflation.
That's correct.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, it's actually over $1,000.
Okay, so if the funding cliff goes away, what is that number, not funding cliff goes away, the formula transition grant goes away, what does that go to that we need through basic allotment to make up the difference?
So for us, we're losing somewhere, depending on, every time we run these numbers and update a number, things change. We're looking around $650 to $700 that we're losing per student to the formula transition grant. So if you increase the basic allotment for inflation a little over $1,000, we would be okay. We are looking at, we're a growing district, we're a fast growth district, right? Students are how you add revenue to the district, right? The more students that are here in attendance, the more revenue that the district receives. And in turn, you've got more expenditures to go along with those. Well, if you're a fast growth district, yes, are you gonna have some struggling times because the basic allotment has not increased? Yes, you will, but you're not necessarily gonna be in a huge deficit funding crisis like we are, because we're also getting hit with this formula transition grant. It's a huge funding cliff to us.
And that was the conversation 2 weeks ago when we had the North Texas superintendents and CFOs. You have districts that aren't growing anymore, but then we had some fast growth districts in the room that aren't in the same pain points as we are because they're not formula they're needing to add 550 teachers next year, one particular district, but they don't have the FTG side of it. So we're in a very particular, interesting situation where we're fast growth, but yet we have this piece that's going away, and no one else fast growth has that funding cliff.
So I just wanna make sure I heard, correctly. So it's we really need 1,700, approximately 1,700 per student to account for both.
All things equal, yes.
And I think that's the difficulty, and I'm not gonna speak for our legislators, is that because we're one of 80 some odd districts, the FTG isn't widely known about, and so bringing equity across amongst all the districts helps some more than others. There's not really, equity there, so I know it's probably difficult to individualize district funding, but that's what it looks like, because we're losing a lot if when the formula transition grant goes away.
We are.
So speak a little bit to, during one of the special sessions, there was an amendment on the floor, once on FTG, but it was an FTG with, I believe, an offset of recapture.
Yes.
And so that still didn't impact us because our recapture's so low and it's on tier 2 anyway, so.
Right, so, that would have helped many formula transition grant districts. There's quite a few of these districts have a large recapture amount, larger than the formula transition grant. So had that gone into place, we would have been one of very few that would have been left out of that. And which is why, one of the reasons that we were contacting our legislatures and arguing against it and saying, no, we want that funding for all, not just those with the recapture. To give you an idea, for this specific fiscal year in 23-24, our formula transition grant is around $3.5 million. Our recapture is about $250,000. So that particular, the way that bill or amendment was written, we wouldn't see the relief that the other districts would see. And so we were looking for more of a continuation of formula transition grant with a basic allotment increase. And if you increase that basic allotment and tie it with an inflation factor, then you can take that formula transition grant. We know eventually it does have to go away, but tier that down so that we aren't seeing that impact all at one time without any help from the state
So if I
level.
recall correctly, we were calling out for other FTG school districts like HEB, Midland, to say, hey, do you want to join in on this amendment to extend or replace the FTG funding? But we've learned from them is that they were gonna get more in recapture than they were losing in FTG, and they're like, we're kinda okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And so here Argyle is on this island now, and the only chance we have is if our representatives, who are, I'm glad to see they're here, are sitting here advocating for the districts that they serve, that don't forget about this A-rated school district, this well-run school district, and what the loss of this FTG is doing.
That's correct.
Because it's nothing we've done financially, we're just following how House Bill 3 and, was put on it with FTG, so we're just falling under that.
And when I get the response I get is, well, it's a formula transition grant,
Yeah.
Josh. Transition means transitioning off of it.
Yes.
And the point I tried to make is, well, yeah, the transition was gonna be this legislative session when you replaced that gap in funding that caused that grant to come in place.
Right.
If you're not replacing that gap in funding, there's nothing for us to transition to.
Right. We're transitioning to funding levels prior to 2019 with our expenditure requirements from current year. And there's a huge gap in the cost difference right there.
And then haven't we not gotten some funding because we're an FTG district, like, I'm thinking about the school safety that came through with the 15,000 per campus and.
So, that's correct. So when you see if you were to look at our funding, what they call summary finance, that's what the funding formula is working down to for each district. If you look at that, it would show that funding for us. You would see a line item for that new school safety amount. I'm gonna give you another example. New instructional facilities allotment. So anytime you open a campus, you're given so much money per ADA that first year that campus is in place, and so much for any ADA in addition on the second year that wasn't there in the first year. So we apply for that. We've had campuses open throughout this time. We don't see a net change in that because any increase in that just takes away from the formula transition grant. So our bottom line does not change. So yes, if you look at the summary finance, you will see the school safety allotment on there. You will see the increase in school safety, but you're gonna see a decrease in the formula transition grant, and you're gonna see our funding per student does not change, even though we have the expenditure requirements that are mandated to go with those.
So being an FTG district has had a negative impact on us because we don't see the positives of getting additional funding that the legislature does, because we're not allowed to get it, or we get it in one place but it's
Right.
taken away in another.
That doesn't change our overall funding
It's
level.
the shell game.
Yes,
It's, hey, we're gonna give you $15,000 to go hire security officers or police officers, but we're gonna take it out of your grant.
yes.
And so,
Yeah.
wasn't enough anyway, but.
So whereas
Worse.
other districts are getting funding and they're actually seeing a cash increase, we do not.
That's correct,
because we're an MTG district,
that's correct,
and then that goes away.
yes. So this is our last year of it.
Yeah.
That's why planning for next year is so important, and that's why we've been talking about it. We've been talking about this funding cliff for the last 2 years steady. Any updates you've had, we've been talking about it. We, started talking really proactively last spring, and then this summer, and then legislative efforts coming in this summer and this fall. So,
So is
In
there
all
reason-
honesty, Liz, you've talked about it since House Bill 3 came about.
yes,
You've mentioned in every one of your updates since, I know Mr. Hawksworth and I were on board with that, like, you've said this will end, and what are we gonna do? The legislature is gonna take over, and they understand there's an end date to it, and we don't know the details of that, cause that's years down the road, so.
we had a lot of hope going into this legislative session because we knew there was a surplus, and there was an expectation to fund schools, and that has not happened, so.
So tell me what's the difference in House Bill 3 money that we keep referring to as the $15,000 per campus for the officer that comes, I forget what the word is, when they give it to you and then they
Take it back, the shell game?
Yeah, but it's called, there's a word for it, what's the other word? Anyway, why does that apply, but then like the 2022-25 safety and security standards didn't apply?
That is outside of this funding. So there's the main state funding formula, and the one that you're talking about was an actual grant outside of that. So there was the.
And does Safe Cycle fall outside of that too?
It does.
Okay.
All right, one thing I do want to point out, because this will get very important to us in what we're talking about today. There's two aspects of how schools are funded. There's the maintenance operations, and there's the interest in sinking. So we have general operating and we have debt services. This workshop is based on our general operating, our M&O, and that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about anything that's related to bonds or building buildings or anything else. That is a completely separate bucket of money, and it's a completely separate set of rules. And that's going to become important when we're talking about our potential bond and the next meeting that you have scheduled at 5 o'clock. But this is kind of a list, what are our day-to-day expenditures? It's mainly your staff salary. It's everything to keep the buildings open, right, to operate the district. Similar to what you would have groceries at home, your utilities, minor home repairs, versus our bonds are very similar to your mortgage or a major home repair or land or a car or something like that. So I do want to make that statement that today we're only focused on, in this budget workshop, general operating fund M&O.
And later this week, we'll be sending out a message to staff, because we're gonna do a two-part series, really gonna do a tour on our campuses, 2 parts. We're gonna do a pre-spring break, which we talk M&O and try to educate our staff on that side of the bucket, and then after spring break, we'll go back and do the INS side so that we can make sure they're hearing the messaging that we're having in these conversations, but also hearing it from us as we work through these processes.
And you can't fund M&O with bond money.
That's correct, yes. Okay, a little bit more about school funding. Again, that's something that y'all can look at later. I want to talk a little bit about local share versus state share, though, because this is important, and it's important to our taxpayers because, as you know, home values have escalated, especially in this area. Even though we've been able to reduce that tax rate, a taxpayer may go, you know what, but I owe more than I did last year. Why doesn't the school have money? Well, yes, does that money flow to us? It does, but it goes into that state funding formula, and as the local share increases, we see a decrease in state funding. So it doesn't matter how much that local taxpayer is paying under the state funding formula, it figures in, and that state share will decrease. So there's a misconception to think that, I may personally go out there and pay more to the local school district in taxes. However, that does not mean that we have more per student to spend than we did last year when you paid less. So just some education there on local versus state share.
Now, is that true across the board, or is it?
That is true across the board.
Okay.
Right.
It's a plan.
There you go, it's a plan. You can go back and look at our district strategic plan. This just basically talks about, what we've said as a district that we're gonna do strategically. But estimating revenues is where we start with the budget, internally. And so let's talk about how we're estimating our revenues. We always look at our fall demographic report. As y'all know, we get a fall and a spring update, and in a growing district, that's very, very important. As well as our attendance rate, because we are funded on attendance and not enrollments. Texas is one of the few states that still funds that way. So we estimate 95 to 96% attendance. Prior to COVID, we were at 96.5 to 97.5. But that's come down. We are still pretty grateful that our attendance rate is above 95%, which is pretty good across the state. So for next year, we take the demographic report, we apply attendance rate, we look at how many are estimated in pre-K, because that adds some things, and we come up with an estimated ADA. So we're using 5502 for next year. So in any of our budget estimates, short of a drastic change in what the demographer tells us, this is the number we're gonna use for next year. And we also use historical trends for special populations, which we're gonna talk about on these next slides, but just a reminder to the board, estimated revenues are dependent on estimated ADA. We have missed our mark for 23-24. When we got to the first week of school, we realized we're about 200 short from what the demographer told us and what we budgeted, and that was his low number. Okay, we took that low number as a conservative approach to budget. We've been watching that every 6 weeks. So I know you'll see us parents grade reporting in 9 weeks, but everything we do as far as counting students, attendance, all of that, that happens in 6 week increments that we report to the state. So we watch that. What I'm gonna show you on these next slides are as of the end of the first semester. I don't have the 4 6 weeks yet, we'll update that. But coming back to you, that will have to come back to you probably by March, is a large budget amendment for this year. And that's gonna decrease our estimated revenue for the year. And we're gonna decrease it by over $1 million at this point, if there's not a drastic change between the 4th and 5th 6 weeks moving forward. And that's because we're well below what the demographer had us. And we've talked about that. I know we've pointed that out to you in every communication.
But when you say budget amendment, you're saying we're coming with another amendment to increase the deficit by
Increase the
$1
deficit.
million?
It will be $1 million plus.
Correct.
Okay, and I don't wanna glance over this fact. I mean, this is, you know, most states that believe in fully funding public education are going to ADA, they're going to enrollment numbers.
That's correct.
When you put us in this position where we have to kind of guess based on what a demographer's telling us, and then put a percentage of attendance rate, that's a variable we're gonna have to live with all throughout the year that could put us in the problem we're about to face, right?
Right.
Whereas if we just kind of go on enrollment, we'd be in much better shape.
That is correct. We have, in planning a school, you have to staff based on how many students you believe will be here, your full enrollment. You cannot staff a classroom thinking, well, I think only, instead of 22 kids are gonna be here every day, I think only 20 kids are gonna show up every day, and that's how we'll staff. You have to staff based on full enrollment. Our expenses are based on full enrollment, but our revenue is based on how often they attend.
Okay,
And if there's
getting
been
frustrated.
there has been some bills that have been floated out there in different legislative sessions to move to enrollment that just has not gained much traction yet. But that is true. So I just, as a
Because it
reminder,
costs them more money.
it does
right?
cost more
Even
money.
though they got a ton sitting there that they're holding hostage.
But I'm trying to think, one ways you can go, just get some momentum behind going based on enrollment, not ADA. Then we may not need $1,000 increase in
That is
basic
correct.
allotment.
Right,
I mean,
you
there's,
balance that out.
if they're freaking out about the $1,000 allotment, well then let's change the formula.
Okay, this is nothing new to you. It's just a recap of our demographic. And if you'll remember, we had an update, I believe in December, based on some new information. I have not used those numbers here because the next 2 years did not change those numbers for us. So we're still using this for the most immediate planning needs. We'll use the other update for the long-term planning. So here's some special population things that I want to point out. So the ones in red are the one we're talking about. So this kind of gives you a history of 21, 22, 22, 23, and then 23, 24 is only as of the end of the first semester. So when you're looking at these, we kind of use historical tracks to try and determine, how many students are going to show up. We have in some places they're FTEs, and in some places they're ADA. And so we have to break down each different type of student population here for the funding formula, and we use this as trends to try and estimate what's going to come in the years to come. So once you look at, our total refined ADA, 2 years ago, we were barely over 4,000. Now we're in 2 years, we're over 5,000. We're going to move up, we're estimating 5,500 for next year. So we are growing at a fast rate, it just goes to show that our attendance is there. Look at our total weighted special ed funding, FTE. So look at the growth in that from 306 to in 2 years to 440. That's significant growth.
That 440 is not a full year though.
It's not, but, it should change, we'll estimate that to change a little bit up or down by the end of the year.
Okay.
The point in highlighting some of these is we have some areas of our student population that's growing at a higher pace than others, and so a lot of our expenditures go to that. I don't think there's a district in the state that will tell you that they spend less than 100% of their special education allotment from the state. We spend well more than 100%, and so does every other district. But it is a high need area, and the expenses there are significant, and we are growing at a fast pace.
So, but help me, I mean, when you say, what is our special education allotment? I mean, is it like you're saying we get an extra $1,500 per kid, or?
So we may have, it's based on these student populations here, and I can send that to you, what the total is, so don't take these numbers to heart, I'm giving you examples. So say our, special ed, allotment might be $1 million, we may spend $1.5 million or $2 million. That money would come directly for special ed students. Same thing as, you'll have some money that's coming directly for, ESL students, some money that's directly for CTE. And we have to track those dollars, and you're required to spend a certain percentage directly on those programs each year. But special ed, we spend more than our allotment every year. So just some knowledge there and some trends that we're pointing out. If you look at the next one, dyslexia is another area. I want you to notice that there was quite a bit of growth from 21-22 to 22-23. We won't see the growth in 23-24 until after the spring semester, because that is where the students are being tested, and I'm gonna ask,
They're being screened in the
Thank you.
fall and the spring, and then they'll qualify for services. So we're, at this point, this exact moment, we're about 30 more than that who just qualified recently.
the next one there's 3 areas there of CTE funding. You have a tier
Well, I
1,
just
2,
wanna
and
point
3.
one thing out, dyslexia, we've had a 54% increase from 22 to 24. Am I reading that right?
Yes, there's a
Okay.
large increase.
Well, it's gonna be more than that.
It's gonna be more than that when you.
She's already
just want
saying
you to
there's
know
already
that
30
when you're
more
only-
there.
Yeah, when you're only looking at the
So it's
first
gonna be
semester in
bigger.
dyslexia, you don't get your increased student count there.
Okay.
Do we get any, I'm raising my hand. Do we get any, state funding
Yes,
for special ed?
yes.
Federal is, yeah, federal.
So
Yes.
together, that's your 100% that
You
you're
look-
saying that we get, I mean,
And we spend more than that, yes.
okay, we spend more than
Well
that.
over 100%.
So we have no other means of funding special ed?
No.
And you don't know but is it 10% more than we get?
Oh,
Is
no,
it 50% more
It's-
than we get?
We're gonna be closer to 50% more than we get. I'll send that as a follow-up. I'll give you the exact dollar amounts of where we've had the last couple of years and what we're expecting this year.
So it's another example, like the school safety bill, where what they're telling us we have to do costs more than what they're giving us.
And if you'll remember, some of the bills that were presented to be considered, I believe, in the regular session and special session had to do with special ed funding for that reason.
You know, our special ed students, you know, they have certain codes depending on how much time they're in a self-contained versus a regular education or inclusion setting. And so that funding is based on their code. But what they don't take into account is the extreme differences of a student that might be in our life skills. We may have a student that has to have a one-on-one and a student who is perfectly fine, and so that's not taken into account. That's why you go over, because it's not about the IEP and about what's in the student's individual paperwork, it's about their class setting. And so it's not individual student based, so that's why every year it can be different.
When we were invited by Miss Murphy to go over there, we got to spend time in a kindergarten classroom with some of the kids in resource. And there were probably 2 kids, and one of them had to have a committed aide, just for him. And I'm pretty good with agile little babies, and he grabbed more things while I was with him. So, I just don't think they fund thinking that you're gonna have that wide of a range.
They're funded based on a code, and that's
Right.
it. And there are lots of versions of that code in that room.
Well, and in a self-contained classroom, we were in there as well. I think there were 6 students maybe, roughly 6, 7. And one of them had a full-time aide and was kind of in an area by him or
But if
herself.
you don't give them the aid, you lose the teacher.
Right.
Because
Or you
she's-
don't provide
she's
the
busy
correct,
the whole
whether
The
it's
time.
aide is
or
with them
correct
all day
supports.
long, it's
Right.
one child.
And sometimes it's not just about the people, it's the supports and the training and things, but either way, if you don't provide the correct supports, you will lose the teacher.
You don't have retention.
So I just want to reiterate what Mr. Westrom said, right? This is another example of an area where they mandate certain things and then don't give you the funding to do it. Right? So you have to rob funding from something else, and it's just this downward spiral that continues and it never stops.
That's true.
Unless you're a voucher. you can just take the 10.5 and put it wherever you want. There's no strings attached.
That's an endless conversation. It's gonna go right back to another session that never has.
But I'm just saying, there's no strings attached though. They don't have any mandates to spend that 10.5 in any specific.
Or take special ed, right?
Yeah. Or take,
One other thing I want to point out here, two other areas. One is CTE. You'll see there's tier 1, 2, and 3. This is where Dr. Jordan has talked to you about new classes and new program that she's wanting to bring in. Not only is it great for the student and great for the education, but some of these can also generate money to pay for themselves. And that's where we go back and figure out, what is it, how many students does it take to sign up to actually pay for something as they're listed. So that's one area. You'll see a big difference in tier 1 to tier 2 from 22-23 to 23-24. We had a change in what was being taught at the middle school, and those classes actually became more eligible for more funding in a tier 2. And so we look at those and track them, but I just wanted to point out that that is an important piece when Dr. Jordan is talking to you about different offerings and different CTE pathways that are coming in there. And then look at our, down at the bottom, bilingual ESL, it's ESL for us, and look at the increase there. In 2 years, we went from 154 to now we're at 363. So that's a growing population for us and a growing need for us.
And did we see that coming? I mean, that's part of the problem too, is when you're trying to plan for next year's budget, you really don't know what students are coming. Like even the demographer report will have a number, but no needs attached. So
That's correct. It has just a base, we just have an estimate that a student is coming in, not what.
No idea.
Right, not the different, the different individual aspects of that student.
Services.
right.
So, all right, so those make up our special populations. Then we also have our taxable assessed values. We won't receive that information until later this spring. But just kind of a reminder that we are growing in our TAV. We're growing significantly in our TAV. And then we always typically look at what we get as a preliminary value at the end of April versus what our certifieds are, because we've got to take that preliminary value and try and estimate where we would end up. Because we're our budget is set. If we come back to you after July 25th, we can't really make any changes at that point. It's too far in the process. So we have to do some trends there as well. And then just a reminder that our district is funded mainly residential. We always get that question, what's residential versus commercial? This is kind of a slide that we've used in some educational finance 101 topics. So this is based on this current year.
So our residents are footing the bill
They are
significantly.
significantly fitting the
And
bill.
have been and will continue to be.
That is correct. All right, some tax rate information. We'll talk a little bit more about timeline here in a minute, but basically just a reminder that we do have to go through some steps after we receive our certified values. At the very 1st of August, that happens in just a few days before we're eligible to publish our tax notice and public hearing information, and then you have a timeline of how long you have to wait until you have your meeting. Our INS rate, again, will remain at 50 cents for the near future. And then just a history of our tax rates. The green is the total tax rate. Blue is INS and red is M&O, and you can see that's a declining line there. Mainly the decline comes from the M&O rate, and again, we were able to drop that over 18 cents for this year, which is a great thing for our taxpayers. Doesn't change how much we receive total, but it's great for our taxpayers. Formula transition grant, we've talked about this a lot, but I wanted you to have a reference in here. When you have this document online, that link there on FTG Argyle ISD is an active link, and you can look at that for more information, anything that you need.
I think the red bullet is very important.
It is. Funding cliff. So.
$3.5 million.
And I mean, that's something we're gonna be dealing with this summer.
Yes.
It is.
So from 2019 to 2024, the legislature had 5 years to fix that or realize that it was happening. They set it
Yes.
up and then they.
And it was intended for 5 years, right?
It was intended originally
to be 5 years.
My understanding of it, and again, I'm not in the state level of this, so that may tell you differently, but my understanding was the thought was it was only set as 5 years because the individual districts, the way you're funded, you would grow out of the need of formula transition rate. That was true for many, many districts. As their individual unique aspects of each individual district, grew over time, they grew out of that formula transition. We have not, we've grown into it. It's gotten larger for us every single year. Very first year of it, we received less than $1 million. and it has grown significantly each year for us. So the way our individual district is set up with all the different aspects of the funding formula, we've gone in the opposite direction of how this was actually intended to help districts.
And
And so it's
that's-
put us in a larger bind and a larger crisis than what I believe they thought we would
And
be.
it just speaks to, you can't have a universal funding
Right.
for all the districts in the state because we're all in different sizes and stages of where we are in our growth.
That's correct.
Now, why do you think we got deeper into it?
If I could answer that, I would be doing a lot better to explain it to you.
You did a
I
different
think it's
job.
I think it's the individual aspects of some of our student populations are not growing as fast as others. Some of our, it also has to do with the property value and everything in there, every little aspect of that funding formula. And I think that just the uniqueness of each individual school, if I could point to one thing and tell you why we didn't grow out of it, I would really like to. I don't know that. And I've talked to people, different organizations to try and help come to an understanding of that, and that I'm still at a loss for
Let's
that.
put it this way, you didn't build a model to create more dependency on.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
it was
You-
not a district.
That wasn't
No.
the way we've approached running the district, is saying, hey, let's figure out how to get more formula transition grant money.
Right. No, if we could have said we were a district growing out of that, that would have been our choice,
Yeah.
if we had a choice in this, because what do we need to change to make that happen? We don't have the ability to change any of those things that make this happen.
Well, and it's, you take what comes through your doors,
That's correct.
as opposed to private schools, by the way, which they don't have to take everybody, they don't have to take special ed, they can just,
There's a choice of things.
they don't have to take dyslexia, they don't have to take any of it.
Without ESSER funding, would we have felt this sooner?
A little, so let's talk about ESSER a little bit, because ESSER is a big term for a lot of other districts, and we've talked about that. If y'all remember, that was a requirement in building our budget in the previous years. So again, we were one of a few districts that did not qualify for the majority of ESSER funding, and that was mainly based on our socioeconomic student need. So there was districts of our same size and makeup that may have received several $1 million, $4 and $5 million, where we received $300,000. And so we go through ESSER 1, there's an ESSER 2, and there's an ESSER 3. We received the most in ESSER 3, and it was $300,000. That's not a large impact to our budget. So the state came back and said, okay, we recognize there's some districts that did not receive a large amount of ESSER funding, so we're gonna give you what's called ESSER supplemental. So we were identified as one of those districts. We received roughly $2 million over a 2-year span. It actually could have been a 3-year span. We used it all within 2 years. We knew that, we knew right away that that funding was not long-term funding. We used that to supplement the M&O along the way. I do believe we were able to hire a few staff members a year early for those positions of what we had intended with that funding. There were some differences in those requirements. The schools that received all of the ESSER funding and the large dollar amounts, they had, say, a 25% that they had to spend on student needs and bringing students up, the learning loss from COVID. A district that receives supplemental ESSER had a 62.5% formula that you had to meet. So there were requirements of how we had to spend those funds, a much larger requirement than some of the districts that you hear, about 4 million, 10 million, whatever it was. They had different rules than we had to play by. And that we actually finished with those funds last year. So any funding from that we took in this year, in the 23-24.
I don't wanna go down another tangent, and if I am, just tell me, but my understanding, and I learned this from Dr. Ruggles not too long ago, is that when it comes to the special ed population, we also, because I think it's in the code, the education code, that we have to provide services, special education services and support services for homeschool kids and for kids at Liberty.
Yes, that is correct. There are certain services that have to be
That's a
provided.
private school in our
Because
district.
it's IDEA, federal funding.
Yes, and speech therapy, any private schools.
And
that
is there
would be
additional,
that.
do they
none of them-
cover that cost for us, or do they
So that is
just impose that burden on us?
That is under our federal funding for special ed, and it comes under that. Because we receive those federal funds makes us
Okay.
required to provide those services. And I will tell you, I'm not an expert at telling you what services we have to provide, I just know that, yes, you're correct, we do have to provide services. Okay, this is just, sorry, you're gonna see a lot of bar charts here, those are the charts I like, and that's what you get. So, general fund. This is is a history of our general fund revenue over the years, and you're gonna say, hey, you just talked about we weren't getting any more money every year, what's the deal? Remember, it's funding per student, and we showed you how our enrollment has grown significantly over the years, and so is our funding, because it's a funding per student. The reason that you've got 23-24 in light blue and 24-25, because those are still estimated. 23-24, again, I spoke a minute ago that we were gonna come in and lower that estimate, in a couple of months, so that line will actually drop. But right now, we're estimating 24-25, we're actually gonna receive a few $100,000 less, even with more students, and a significant number of more students, less than we received this year. And so, this is why we're here. We see this coming, we've known it's coming, we've been talking about it for a long time.
Because we're at a deficit budget this year,
That is correct.
and we're gonna have more students and get paid less next year.
That's right.
And by the trends, probably more ESL students and a higher demand for SPED programs and employees.
That is correct. So if you take this and you look, and I should have done a side by side here, I'm sorry, but if you look at our expenses, if we do nothing, and we say we're gonna staff at the same level we staffed moving forward, and we're gonna spend all the dollars at the same level that we start, our campus budgets, our department budgets, everything remains equal. This is what we're projecting on our general fund expenses to go. We're expecting that to still climb, because we've got more students coming, and it's gonna cost us more money. Bless you.
So is it an interesting generalization to say that if vouchers were approved and passed, that we would still, as a district, number one, we'd probably lose some high-level students, maybe, or we'd lose students that a private school doesn't have to take the kids that need the special assistance. And so, would it be fair to say that with a voucher system, that there are school districts out there that would have a higher percentage of kids with unique needs than what they have now? I'm throwing that out there as a possibility. I mean, it would be from district to district, but I think that's one of the things that a voucher system puts a burden on public school districts, because private schools don't have to take kids that are learning different in some way, but we still have to teach them.
We teach any child that comes in
Right,
within
that
our
lives
boundaries.
within our boundaries.
That's right.
Yeah.
Can we just leave that slide there
Yes.
and the rest of the day?
So,
So that our friends from the legislature that are here, thank you for coming, can take that and digest it. And try to help us figure out how we're gonna pay for that.
and I want,
No clue how we're gonna pay for that.
So-
And by the way, the districts around us are gonna be twice that or more.
and when we talk about collaboration with other districts, and we've been in a room and we've talked about how big your deficit is, and we're talking dollar amounts, their dollar amounts are larger than ours, because their budgets may be many times larger than ours. But then we started talking about percent. We were the highest percent in the room, by far.
That's because of the FTG.
Yes.
It is.
In fact, that percent was twice most of the districts in the room.
Yeah, I mean,
They
if
were
they
about
weren't-
3 to
yeah.
4%.
Yeah, and if you take FTG, makes up about 4.5% of that number.
So I don't wanna go down a wormhole.
Let's go.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
just do it.
Where do you find 4.6 million in the budget?
So that's some of the things we've got to talk to you about.
Can we get our ADA up to 100%?
You can do some things, to try and encourage students to come to school, but there's a fine line. You don't wanna encourage a student to come to school sick.
Well, and
Right,
the
and
flu
then
is
that's what's
awful
happening.
this year.
Right.
I feel like Hilltop has been missing half their kids for the past 2 weeks because the flu is knocking people out.
Well, whereas the
Days
high
at a
school,
time.
they're all attending.
Right, because they don't want to
they
be
want
exempt.
exemptions on their.
They'll go
final stuff.
dead.
So if we were funded by enrollment rather than attendance, the sicknesses don't hit us.
They wouldn't hit our financial.
They wouldn't hit our
Right.
financials.
So, when we look at trends in attendance, we always know our first 6 weeks usually, one of the higher ones, second's pretty good, third's okay, fourth is always the lowest. I mean, it's just, so you can't take your attendance rate from that first 6 weeks and think what you're gonna get for the rest of the year. So we look at trends. We know the fourth is bad, the fifth, probably the second worst, and then it bounces back up typically on the six weeks. It's very hard to look at the last few years though, because if you look at a 5-year average, you always get those COVID years in there, so you kinda have to throw those out and pull in some other years. and look at it, but the 4-6 weeks is typically your worst on attendance. Okay, so we're gonna look at some potential revenue streams, and then we're gonna look at some potential budget efficiencies. So the biggest potential revenue stream that we have as a district is Aveda. If y'all remember, they used to be called TREs and not VATREs, it's just a change in the name, it means the same thing. Argyle ISD did a TRE in 2012, and you're allowed to ask your voters for 17 cents. At the time, the way the funding formula was and the way it affected our district, we felt the best thing was 10 cents at that time. And so we have operated on that. Our taxpayers were great to pass that at the time. And so we've had 10 cents of that possible 17 since then. So that means we have 7 pennies we can look at. Elections can only be held in November. They require an efficiency audit. And there's some certain timelines up here that you have to look at in going through that process. So this is something that we are gonna talk quite a bit over the next few months. And it's probably something that as an administration we will be recommending to you as a possibility. Because this, I haven't given you a dollar amount there yet because we're still working on looking at it and reviewing it and making sure that I can tell you it's in the range of $2.5 million. It will not solve our problem, but it could potentially get us a long ways through the deficit. The problem is you don't know it before you set your budget. So you cannot count on that revenue going into 24, 25. Because it would be November before you know whether it would pass or not.
And is some of that, is that 2.5 million net? Because does some of that maybe get recaptured?
It does, and that is net, and I've got
Okay.
a slide in here to show you that a little bit later. But again, I don't want you to grab onto that 2.5 and say it's always gonna be 2.5. We're still working on those numbers, working with some different people to help us estimate those numbers to make sure that we have a good number, that when we put that out there, that we say, this is what we feel like this would bring into our district.
Because the reason you didn't go out in 2012 for the full 7 pennies was because there was a calculation done that you realized if the voters did pass and gave us all those pennies, a lot of that money or most of that money above 10 cents would be sent to the state under recapture.
That is correct. And now the funding formula has changed since then, so it's different amounts, but you're correct. Any penny that we have left to ask the voters for, part of that goes back to the state.
Even in the 7 cents.
In the 7 cents that we have remaining. And we'll have a slide that we'll get to in a minute that kind of lays out a little bit better for you.
Cause those are
Right here.
coppers.
Our next slide. Alright, so talking about the M&M tax rate, tier 1, maximum compressed rate, that is the main tax rate that we set, that there is a maximum compressed rate that's set by TEA that we can't go over. All we can add to it are the pennies that have been approved. Of the tier 2, let me back up for just a second. Tier 1, if you were a district that's paying millions back in recapture, they're more than likely a recapture district on their tier 1. We are a recapture district, but we are not on tier 1. So there is a difference there in recapture districts. So if we ever become a tier 1, we'd have to show recapture here, but we are not right now. So under tier 2, you can have up to 8 golden pennies. There's no recapture on those golden pennies. We have all 8 of those pennies. So if someone asks you, hey, why don't you go get the pennies that aren't under recapture, we already have them. That's already counted in our revenue. There's 9 pennies that could be copper pennies. Those are subject to recapture. We have seven available. I'll make it a little bit more complicated for you. Just know when I talk about 7 pennies, it's a round number. In any time, beginning with the 2019 House Bill 3, anytime the basic allotment is increased, your extra pennies are compressed. So our 10 pennies were compressed down to, I believe, 9.3 since then. So it really will be it will have a 7 point something that we're asking for, but just to make it simple to you when we're talking 10 and 7. We'll have to get into some specifics later on, but anytime there's a basic allotment increase, those pennies are compressed. So just know that is where that extra recapture would come.
In some of the bills and some of the conversations I've had with our representatives, they had mentioned that maybe they were trying to build in an extra penny in those bills.
Probably talking about an extra golden penny.
And would that be helpful?
It would be.
Okay.
It would move one of our pennies that are level 2 recapture from copper into golden with no recapture.
But we don't know, you can't estimate how helpful that would be in terms of overall revenue if they added.
I can tell you we paid this year about $250,000 estimated in recapture, so it'd be about half of that per penny.
I lost that.
That's how much your income's
It's
gonna
about
be, you know, week after
125,000
pay.
Yeah.
penny.
Per
You're gonna
penny,
get
in this fiscal
$125,000.
year, right, in
Wait,
this
wait, wait,
fiscal
wait, so
year.
an extra, okay, I like when it breaks down to dollars, so an extra golden penny to us is about $125,000 in revenue?
Right, because we already have the golden penny, it's only the recapture we would be saving on it.
Okay.
So, yeah, sorry.
You know, that
There,
was
there's a
just-
lot of ifs, ands, and buts in here.
I know, you thought you found $4.5 million.
He's looking for.
Hey, I like your thinking.
I do like it.
That's not a
It would
golden
be
penny
great
in my
if we
mind.
turned all of those
It's not a
golden
golden
pennies,
ticket.
Yeah.
turn all those golden pennies into golden pennies, that would help quite a bit. All right, other revenue streams that we're looking at and researching, are facility rentals. We've done quite a bit of revamping of our facilities, one, just to make sure that every building is being treated the same, all our elementaries, and that it's, a level playing field for anyone that wants to rent. But then what can we do? Is there a way to generate more funding there? We are looking at, and this one hurts me to even say, but a transportation pay to ride. We have to look at it. I'm not saying that we're gonna suggest it to you, but we will have a dollar amount that we can apply to that and tell you what it would be. We're also researching, transportation 2 mile versus 3 mile and different things. We're looking at a tuition-based pre-K. It's true it will bring in more revenue, but there's expense associated with that. This would just be a self-funding. It's a great thing now that we have a 4th elementary opening up, we'll have some extra classrooms. If we can provide additional pre-K programs and it not cost us anything, that's a good thing for the students. So that's why it's on here, so it is just a self-funding program. And then an optional technology device fee. We're gonna look at some optional fees there. And there's a,
We had that. They
No,
told us we couldn't do it.
It had to get
It's a little
removed,
different.
right?
You can have it if it's paid for by as an optional option for parents, and then you can set up a fee, like, first, breakage is this, or free, second breakage is this, but you can do optional technology fees.
ours were not optional before. And so we cannot do
So
it non.
we
I've
set
been
out an
involved.
optional scale and say, pay us if you'd like to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
People
Yeah.
will,
You'll be
people
surprised.
will.
I like,
If you looked
the
at our
state
website-
says that to us now.
Yeah, would you be surprised how many parents wanna just pay that up front and have the first breakage covered, not have to deal with paying for anything? I mean, it's,
I think people would.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our breakage schedule and break it
It's
down
not
to
like
how many
insurance.
Chromebooks are broken and have to repair.
Don't say insurance, cause that was part of the problem.
Right.
well, it's mandatory though,
Yeah.
and that's, I have the same experience as you have.
Can I raise another point here on technology? This is another example where the state has passed all, these guys, they love to celebrate, they passed these new bills that say, hey, everybody's gotta take a test online.
Mhm.
Okay, but the problem is we don't have a device for every kid.
That's right.
And they don't give us more money to go one-to-one technology. We somehow have to figure out how to get every kid a device without any extra money.
That is correct, and one of the grade levels we're struggling with right now is 2nd grade. Dr. Jordan's talked to us about that. In 2nd grade, we do not provide one-to-one, but there is testing at that level, I believe.
In third
Third
grade, in
grade.
order to prepare them for a
Yes.
third grade test, you can't start at the beginning of third grade.
And so what many school districts have to do, and we have done in the past, is we have to pass bonds to fund the technology mandate that the state imposes on us to provide technology to the students. They don't give us any money, so we have to pass a bond to buy a 8-year depreciating asset on a 25 to 30-year note.
One correction on that, we actually put that on short-term.
We do
debt.
short-term
Good.
bonds, but it's
It's
still,
short-term.
not
But
short
still.
enough,
Right.
Yeah.
right? It's still 10, what are they, 10?
I think they're actually shorter than that. We can talk to RBC about that, but there were some rules in place on, now that you have to set your one-to-ones out as a separate proposition, there are some rules on the length and terms of those bonds. And they should be, because you're only gonna have those devices for a short amount of time, you're
Yes.
only paying for them forever.
Okay, good.
One thing on the transportation pay to ride, just for anyone who watches this, you said that, cause we talked about it before, you would scale it like with free and reduced lunches.
Yes.
They would be.
Any of those types of programs would
Yes.
be.
Yes.
And a cap at, 3 children or, multiple.
Thank you.
Yes, it's similar to our, if any of you have had a child participate in UIL, whether it be academic or
Yes.
athletic, we have a fee for that, we have a
Yes.
cap and
Yes.
amount per family, and then we also have some processes put in place for those that, are need-based as well.
Right.
And these are just 4 bullet points that you're coming up with on how to reduce the deficit
That's
that we're
correct.
faced with. But the reality of it is there is no way we can charge enough to overcome that deficit?
No.
Which will be the
No.
next slide.
That's why we're gonna talk to you about some efficiencies. And these conversations are not pretty, they're not nice, they're not good conversations, but they're conversations that we have to have at this point.
Yeah, we can't put our head in the sand.
No,
We cannot. So if you
hope
wanna,
is not a strategy.
if you wanna look at most school district budgets, and you wanna look at it in the version of $1, what is $1, where's your $1 spent? Every district's gonna be at 80% personnel or higher. And over the past few years, some of those districts have gotten up to 85 and 86% personnel. We're hovering around 80% personnel. 20% is the rest, and you've gotta remember, in those 20%, we have some fixed costs, like utilities and things like that. When we're talking about reducing the budget, we cannot reduce the budget all in that 20%. There's not enough to cut there that we have the ability to cut. So this is where some difficult conversations come up with personnel. We have to look at our staffing levels.
And others, you like utilities?
Utilities, supplies,
Maintenance.
travel,
Just your campus budgets.
right, repairs, anything like that.
Can't turn off the lights and the ACs, which is.
We cannot.
Okay.
We might can do some efficiencies there, but we can't turn them off while people are here. All right, so campus-based budgets. We fund our campuses, and we've talked to y'all about this in previous budget workshops, based on a resource allocation. So elementary students all get the same dollar amount, middle school dollar amount, high school dollar amount. And we do that based on how many students we think are gonna be on that campus. We come up with the dollar amount, here's your budget, they plan out their budget. We're gonna come up with some dollar amounts of what a 10% reduction would be, a 15%, and a 20%, because we're gonna have to consider all of those. We've always allowed special funding requests, so if a campus or department said, hey, this is something good for our students, we wanna try and put this program into place, can't fit into my budget this year, I need some help to get it off the ground, whether it be $1,000 or $10,000, whatever it was they brought to us, we considered those, we ranked them, we brought them to you for consideration in the budget. We've been able to fund a lot of those in the past. We aren't gonna even consider them this year. There's no sense in us asking the people to put the work into bringing that to us when we know we can't fund them. So those are not gonna happen this year. We're gonna move to zero-based budgeting on department budgets. And that's gonna take, a lot of change in thought and a lot of work on our departments, but it's something that we've gotta do this year. And we're gonna have to prioritize, their budgets that they've had in the past, and we're gonna have to put some priority 1s, 2s, and 3s with those, and not everything's gonna get funded. And that's just a fact of being able to go into this, in the mindset that we're gonna be able to come back to you with some reductions. We've done an internal review of department 5-year plans. We've done those in the past, we're gonna continue to do those. Again, personnel is 80% of the budget. Increased enrollment, that calls for increased FTEs. We need more teachers. When you have 500 more students showing up, you cannot have the same number of teachers in the same capacity that you've had in the past. We've run a model for our new elementary that's opening, JRE Elementary. If we staff that elementary at our current staffing level, it costs us $2.6 million. That is included in your budget deficit that you've already seen. But just so you know, where is that deficit growing? We're staffing a new elementary. With that elementary, you've got to consider utilities, our contracted custodial, our property insurance. You also have inflation on all of those when you talk about it district-wide. We'll bring you some more specifics on those at future workshops, but one specific that I can tell you on our electrical, we have areas that are in a deregulated area and areas that are not. In our deregulated area, we're looking at, since 2019, over 61% increase in electrical costs there. And we've had that contract reviewed, and we've talked about it with outside people, and we can tell you, we're still getting a great rate. The just fact of the matter is there is significant inflation out there that we're having to deal with. And again, we've broken these down. We'll bring those to you at later workshops, some specific ones so you can see at each different level where that inflation is coming. Some other things we need to look at. We've talked to you about the staffing efficiency study that Moat Casey is reviewing right now. Mr. Daniel has been working with Moat Casey. They are bringing to our February board meeting their report. We have scheduled for the March budget workshop to discuss the staffing plan and have it acted on in the March board meeting. We've also done a transportation department review. We used TASBO there. It helped us line out what we need as far as busing for the future, as far as if there's any change that we can do to our routing. I know y'all have heard from parents, y'all have heard from people that were concerned that we don't have enough drivers, we aren't able to hire enough drivers, so it was mainly our middle school routes. Had quite a few students on them. We need 2 more routes this year alone just to get our middle school routes to where we don't have 3 to a bus on some of them. So we've got some things there that we want to look at. We're also having a case with special education department review. That was actually a little bit farther behind the staffing efficiency study, so that'll come to you at a later date. We're looking at energy management. Some things that many people don't know. We looked at energy management last summer. We made changes last summer. We changed our offsets and our degrees by 1 degree. We made changes to our parking lot lights. We made changes to our building lights. We are looking at making other changes. Our energy management person has put dollars to those for us. And so we can look at what a degree will do. Where are we not controlling efficiently enough our lighting and our AC that we can make changes to that? And gives dollar amounts to review on that. I didn't want you to think that we had not already looked at that. We had. It wasn't widely talked about, but we made some changes this past summer. We haven't heard anything about those. So they've gone probably unnoticed, but they are a savings to us. Software review. Software is a large dollar amount. We're gonna look at all of our software, what it costs us, how often it's being used. Is it something that we are gonna continue, or do we have to look at cutting some of those software products? You know, it may be that there's a software that's used at one campus, but every other campus is using something else. Do we need to go into a buying for the whole district and get purchasing power there and efficiency buying power versus having that set up at the different campuses? Curriculum purchases. There's large dollar amounts on curriculum purchases. We're gonna look at, I believe there's some reviews of what we're using. Dr. Jordan's department's going through that, what other products may be out there that meet our needs, that we would actually want to use, and that cost less money. Permanent substitutes have been something that we implemented, I believe, after COVID. Each campus had a permanent substitute, I believe 2 at high school. That's because we have so many, things happen. There's not a day that goes by that we don't need a substitute. We have been phasing those positions out this year and going back to just calling subs as needed. And then we're gonna review our vacant positions. If a position is vacant for so long, that's gonna be that position's no longer gonna be listed. Here's some more tough conversations. Summer school. We provide more summer school than is required. We're probably gonna have to scale that back. We're gonna do a job description audit of all non-classroom FTEs. And we're gonna look at attrition. I want to make this point, right now, we are only looking at attrition. Okay, I don't want anyone that's listening to this or goes back and listens to it to think that we're gonna come out and do some wild scale RIF. That is not what we are talking. We are talking attrition only.
Can you explain a RIF?
Yes.
So for everyone listening at home.
So a RIF is where you determine that you can no longer staff at a level that you're staffing, and you can't do it through attrition. So you go in there and you determine which programs need to be cut, and then there's rules set out in board policy how you determine whether it's last person that was hired or all these different things. And there's actual positions that are cut right then with people in those positions that lose their jobs.
Positions, programs.
Right. It's based on programming and classroom need, and that is not what we are talking. Attrition only means that a job becomes vacant, and maybe that job we determine is no longer going to be staffed, or that job is staffed but another one's not, and we have someone that can move into that position. So there's no job loss there, it's be attrition only.
And sometimes attrition is absorbing a job. So if it's a position we don't fill with a person, but those responsibilities absorb to other staff members.
Can I ask a subjective question?
Yes.
Is there a fear that we're doing all of these efficiency considerations and we're drilling down, that somehow the Hail Mary comes out and you propose a balanced budget, that the fear is our legislators see that balanced budget and they're like, look, they can do it, they don't need the funding?
I do believe that's a real concern. There's always ways that a school district or any job can become more efficient. The efficiencies we're talking about are what are best for students. We're gonna try our hardest to keep this out of the classroom.
Yeah.
Or the employees.
Yeah, I mean, look at those 4 bullet points: attrition, class sizes, master schedule, support staff. That affects morale.
It does.
Okay, I mean, we can't give them raises, and then we take away all their support and we give them more kids. Okay.
And attrition, you get more job for you too.
Right, the efficiencies we're down to are not, if you could go, you have an unlimited budget, right? We wouldn't be talking about these because they're not best for students.
No.
So,
And we
yes,
don't
with
need-
legislative help, we would not be talking about some of these.
You do some of this and you're gonna lose, you're gonna have higher turnover and you're gonna have
You kill your culture.
Yes.
Yeah, more understand. And one of the things I want people to know that are listening is you get audited
You do.
every year. Our financial department, we just went through an audit, did we not?
That's correct. We have an outside audit every single year.
That looks at a lot about how we're spending our resources and how do we do?
Oh, we did great.
Yeah, we do great every year.
Yes.
First
So,
reading.
and then, I mean, you also got a transparency award on financial transparency from the comptroller, right?
That's
I mean,
correct.
so you're not looking at a district that's been careless in their funding or irresponsible in their funding. You're looking at a district that has been rated well on every financial model the state has, applies to us. And these are the things they're doing to us now.
That's
Well,
correct.
and to that
This is
point-
our reward.
To that point, when we were in Austin, Commissioner Morath got up and said that most districts spend between 12,000 and 14,000 per student. And our numbers at that time are from the 21-22 school year, and we were at like 9,700 a student. So I think they look at averages and don't realize those of us that are on the,
It's a good point.
And I believe they're also including other areas,
yes,
that are not part of the state funding formula.
right, federal.
When you
funding.
look at, depending on what data you're pulling off of, the state data, are you know, if someone came to me and said, well, they're funded at 14,000 per kid, I'm gonna say, well, what are you including? Because you're not just including your M&O side.
Some people put the INS side in
Right,
there.
you're including that INS side, and there are a lot of districts that receive funding. Let me correct that, there used to be, that's back down too as well, that funding is not quite as much there. But there are districts that receive EDA and IFA funding, we don't qualify for those, but that can be counted as your funding, even though can only be used to pay bonds, it can't be used for anything we're talking about.
Right.
Those sometimes are put in those numbers depending on what you're looking at. So the first, if someone came to me with a number that large, I would say, let's go look and see what's being included. Because most school districts don't have that funding level on their M&O funding.
But when you look at ours, you told me ours is around 9,600.
9415 is what we have been guaranteed through the formula transition grant. Since
9,400 is our per student funding. When you count all the little things that they.
all for everything on our M&O budget, we're at 9415 on the state funding formula.
And that includes FTG, which is about $600 or $700. So we're looking at going down to, we're going down to $8,700, okay? And somebody's going, why are you losing your mind over school choice? And I go, it's because you're about to give 10.5 per student, and I'm going down to 85. If you gave me the 10.5, if I went from 9,400 to 10.5, we may be okay.
Right, we wouldn't be talking.
We wouldn't have the $4.6 million deficit. That makes up, I have 5,000 kids, that makes up the $5 million right there. But instead, they're sitting there holding up that $4 billion. They're holding up a basic allotment increase to give away 10.5 while we're sitting here having to go down to 8.5.
That's correct.
That's why I'm mad.
I'm telling you, they're not easy conversations to have right now.
Yeah.
When you look at what's on our list, they're just not.
These are not easy conversations to have with our staff and our community,
No.
but Mr. Western's point is pretty easy math.
Mhm.
You wanna give 10.5 away and make us go backwards?
Right.
And that's why why the comments are made, we're being held hostage? These people are gonna lose their jobs, some of them.
And these are all the very things that neighboring and North Texas superintendents are discussing.
Yes.
And
If you look at,
I would say ultimately we drill down to our why. Our why is the educational experience for these kids, and we're trying to dilute it. We're being forced to dilute it.
yes,
When we're meeting every standard, we're an A-rated school district financially, we're an A-rated school district academically, our campuses are rated A almost, I think, across the board. We're meeting every measure that they set for us, and they're cutting our funding.
yeah. And to Dr. Carpenter's point, if you look at some of the news articles, if you watch some of the workshops that our neighboring districts are having, these same conversations are being had. Some neighboring districts have already announced some of their numbers with these and how much they're having, what their class sizes will be and some different things. And it's just the reality of where we're all at right now. You know, our goal is to try and bring these to you in a ranked order that impacts the classroom the least, but at some point we get down to impacting the classroom. That's why our legislative activity is gonna be key, to have something happen at the legislative level to give us funding relief.
The districts that were in this conversation last spring that might have had staff leave because of the situation they were in have now gone to districts who are having this conversation now. And so there's really nowhere you can go that's not having this conversation when you're in the field of education without getting out of it.
So, as we work through our workshops, we'll bring dollar amounts and plans with you, to you. Just a reminder of fund balance. This fund balance came up to the legislature, said, you know, districts have too much money sitting around. So, some districts, that's true, may have a 40% M&O fund balance and can take a little bit better, you know, they may be able to drag this out for 5 years, whatever they feel comfortable with, right? For our situations, that's not. Our goal is 25%. That's 3 months operating, all right? This kind of tells you where we've been. We are at 22, 23, we were just barely above 26%. 23, 24, we end with a pretty major deficit, we're gonna be well below 25%. Because as our budget grows, if we don't grow the dollar amount that's in our fund balance, our percentage will drop. And we are gonna use some of that fund balance this year. So just to kind of let you know where we're at in our M&O fund balance and why this is a need that we need to address right now. We don't have the leeway. We don't have a 40%, we don't have a 50% fund balance. We need to talk right now.
And how does that affect our bonding?
It is a question on our bond rating.
Affects our credit rating.
It does.
So, they, as the state's saying, well, you got a big old fund balance, use that. Well, the reason you try to have a healthy fund balance is because your bond rating's dependent on it.
Well, that, and
Which means it costs you more to borrow if your bond rating goes down, right?
it does. And you need several years that you do. You may have a one-time expenditure, or you may have,
Well,
you know,
you're-
cash flow needs. Our cash flow does not come in 12 equal months, right? It comes in only a certain couple of times a year, and you gotta have the cash flow to make the rest of the year. So that's part of your fund balance as well.
And we're a rapid growth district, and so years that you're opening schools, which for us, every 2 years,
Yes,
that hits your fund balance.
it does.
And so you have to have time to rebuild it because you can't deplete it to nothing and then open a new campus. And we don't have the luxury of not opening campuses.
Yes. If we go below 2 months, fund balance, and we go below 60 days cash on hand, then we will get deemed severely on our financial rating. All right, so our next steps. February board meeting, we'll receive the MOPKC staffing study. March budget workshop, we will discuss the staffing plan. The March board meeting, we're gonna have the district staffing plan as an action item. We will have a board workshop in April and in May. And then as we mentioned before, we are having weekly meetings to review our budget plan and work on putting dollar amounts to ideas and efficiencies and revenue streams to bring back. As administration, we would like to recommend to you a 3-year budget plan to implement efficiencies and revenue streams to bring the district's budget in line with revenue forecast.
And you're saying 3 years because during that time, legislature will meet again.
It will, but we're also asking for 3 years to make a balanced budget for next year. It will be extremely painful.
And I think that's the conversation we've been having, is how much can the organization handle in 1 year, and trying to figure out, you know, how we can do that, across.
How many limbs can you cut off and make it through?
Right. So that would be our recommendation, is a 3-year plan as we look through this process.
And so again, the emotional side of this is, and I'm never not going to talk about our why, is that our educators, our administrators are having to have these tough conversations, do a lot of work behind the scenes, defocusing them from why they're here, which is to take care of our kids.
Right.
So it's not, I'm not saying we're not focusing on education, but we're doing a lot more focusing on finances
Correct.
than a district needs to be.
how many times are you having to meet just in this spring to talk about finances when the focus, we would hope, would be on the education of our students?
Well, I personally, in my career, was, I know I talked to you about it, but I've been part of a district that had a RIF. It was talked about for a couple of years beforehand, and you try to do all these things and everything that you possibly can to avoid that. But I saw, the cut list for 3 years during board meetings, and they would last till 1, 2 in the morning, easy, having those conversations. My particular job lasted till the 3rd year, and then our positions were cut. We were absorbed, but our positions were cut, which I felt was highly detrimental to the district. But I saw elementary technology people, I saw art and music get cut in half. I saw teachers that didn't have jobs anymore. I saw secondary class sizes get bigger. I don't want that to happen here. I do not, and you're right about the emotional piece. For those 3 years, it was very, very hard on the entire staff. And I feel for all our staff here, and I know that you guys do great. Yes, she is the amazing Liz Stewart, and all of you, as far as the cabinet. You guys, I as a board member have every faith in everything that you're going to bring to us, because I know that you will look in every corner, every nook and cranny, everywhere to try to save positions, to not overburden our teachers, to continue to give the best education that we can to our kids. And it's highly unfortunate that because of no fault of our own, based on, and I agree with everything you said, we are a high-rated district on so many levels, but in particular for finance. This is not something that we brought on ourselves. We've been working well, we've been working within the rules, we've been working the way we're supposed to, and we're just not getting the support that we need as a school district, along with obviously many other districts in the state.
Let me say, Liz, you've been telling us, and you've been sounding this alarm before last year, and I thought, it's gonna get worked out. We have a $34 billion surplus. They're in session, it's gonna get worked out. But it didn't. And here we are. And the sad reality of it, and I want everybody to know that's listening, there is $4 billion in the state budget that has been approved, that all they have to do is pass a bill to say, hey, it's released. This is how you're going to be funded. But they will not do it. They will not send that bill to the governor unless they give $10,500 in vouchers with no accountability in it, not subject to the education code. That's the reality of where we're at. They are holding up our funding. And House Bill 1, as big a bill as that was, we would have lost money because it only had a $500 allotment in it, but we lost our FTG funding unless Richard Hayes was successful. Thank you, Richard. Richard Hayes was carrying that amendment for us. And we need more people like Richard Hayes out there fighting for us. Senate Bill 1 had $50 allotment increase in it, and a very small FTG extension. We would lose money. We would still be in a deficit. And so the Senate bill was grossly inadequate. The House bill was better, and it would have been better for a majority of the school districts, but we would have suffered. And so thank you, Richard, for listening to us throughout that whole process.
I think it's important too, as you've called out, Richard, and this support for the people that are listening or that will listen to this, is to look at the candidates that have been in this area for a long time. And we've supported them. And unfortunately, during this last go-around, when Richard did support us, they didn't. And so I think people need to take a hard look at just checking the same box you've always checked, because they didn't support us. And I'm not sure anyone were here other than Richard. So I would just tell people, and I told each of the candidates when I texted them during this whole thing, was is that we may, as you just saw the number up here, the people that donate to those campaigns may have to start donating to the school. So,
Well, and the concern, you know, for I think a lot of us, just as Mr. Westrom said, we feel our legislators are gonna come through, Liz has been talking about this funding for years. And it's gonna come through, legislators are going to, you know, rework House Bill 3 and take care of that FTG and make things, you know, right. We see it, and I don't know that the public in mass understands, like, you know, what's coming right at us. And so workshops like this are imperative that the word gets out, and we need more advocacy than, you know, than we've ever had. And thankfully our community is getting involved, but we need more. And so.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Sorry, it's not, like I say, it's not gonna be easy conversations over the next few months, probably next couple of years, but it's a reality of where we're at.
I think I just wanna make it clear for everyone that's listening in as well that, you know, no decisions have been made at this point. We are just brainstorming, we are looking at every nook and cranny, all the efficiencies that we could possibly look at. But the word attrition is very important, because we're not looking to cut positions at this point. We're not looking to cut programs at this point. But we are going to take a very careful look at everything that does come open as we're looking at positions that come open, anything through attrition that can be absorbed. Those are the kinds of things we're gonna have to look at. But right now, that's our message, is that we're looking at it through attrition only.
But we're gonna have to go into fund balance then?
We may,
I mean, that's what I'm saying, if we're not cutting people, then I'm
Right.
dipping into the fund balance.
which is why we talked about the 3-year.
So I gotta make a decision whether, hey, I'm going into the fund balance to keep people that we need because we're growing,
Yes,
and which is gonna affect my bond rating
yes.
and my ability to float the slow pay. Okay. My declining fund balance.
That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, thank you all. Appreciate it.
4:29.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Adjourn.
Adjourn.